Our newscast tonight. The goal is one and the same, improving welfare. But ruling and opposition party lawmakers cannot see eye to eye on how it should be done. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary nominee Ashton Carter promises to use everything within America's range of capabilities to protect itself from the North Korean threat. And Jordan weighs its options on how to hit Islamic State militants where it hurts the most. King Abdullah vows to fight the terrorist group until Jordan runs out of fuel and ammunition. We have these stories and more coming up. It's very good to have you with us. Welcome to Early Edition at 6, live from our studio in Seoul. I'm Daniel Che.
And I'm Na Hyun-kyung. Thanks for tuning in. Now we start tonight's newscast with a political hot potato that's welfare. The ruling and opposition parties continue to have a heated debate over how to manage the nation's welfare programs.
Right, there are shouts of fix the tax system echoing on one side. The other says make the welfare system fit the current amount of tax revenue. Our Lee Ji-yoon starts us off.
More welfare without tax hikes. A promise that once sounded too good to be true is now stirring up debate between the two rival parties. When President Park Geun-hye took office, she promised to expand welfare without increasing taxes by cutting down on unnecessary projects and plugging tax loopholes. However, the recent hike in cigarette prices and revised income tax codes resulted in public criticism that such policies were hurting ordinary salaried workers. Both parties agree that providing more welfare without increasing taxes just won't work, but the two differ on how to fix the problem. The ruling Saenuri Party is calling for a new welfare system that works for Korea. The ruling party's chief policymaker Won Yu-chul says the government needs to reconsider the provision of free school lunches and free childcare programs. He also said instead of increasing taxes, the government should try to provide necessary welfare according to the tax it collects. The party's new floor leader, Yoo Seung-min, however, says increasing taxes is not out of the picture yet, and the party should discuss ways to provide at least some free welfare programs. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy thinks the problem lies with the tax system itself, not on expanded welfare. The main opposition's floor leader, Woo Young-gun, said Parliament should set up a special committee to revise the current tax system. The party also believes that various tax benefits for the rich and the president's pro-business policies are what's causing the country's widened social polarization and the ballooning household debt. With a little more than a year left until the general elections, the two rival camps are under pressure to find a way to appease an angry public that's criticizing the government for squeezing money out of average wage earners. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
Now, with all of the debate about welfare versus taxes, a new report from the OECD may help put things into perspective. Whenever we have OECD averages or rankings, we don't really get some honorable mentions.
Well, in some reports, yes. Well, the report, this one, shows that Korea's spending on welfare relative to its GDP is at the bottom of the countries surveyed. Song Ji-sun has our next report.
Korea's welfare spending is the lowest in the OECD. The country ranks dead last at 28th out of the 28 OECD countries surveyed last year. The index presents welfare spending as a percentage of GDP, taking into account spending on taxes, pensions, and health and social insurance. Korea's welfare spending was just over 10% of GDP in 2014, less than half of the OECD average. That's just a third of the spending of European countries that topped the list. 6 OECD member nations without 2014 data were excluded from the analysis. Separate data from 2013 shows that the tax burden on Koreans was 24% of GDP, which is also well below the OECD average and just around half that of major European countries. Korea's social welfare spending has hovered at the bottom of the OECD for the past 2 decades. The reports indicate that Koreans are paying less for social welfare and are thus receiving fewer welfare benefits than the countries surveyed. Economists say that Koreans need to pay more taxes to ensure they have a strong social safety net, especially with the combination of slowing growth, a low birth rate, and a rapidly aging population that is sure to lean on the welfare system as they grow older. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Now, in other news, we're following U.S. Secretary of Defense nominee Ashton Carter vows to use all necessary means to defend the U.S. against threats from North Korea. This was at his confirmation hearing on Wednesday in Washington. He also had some tough talk about the Ukraine crisis. For this story, here's Connie Lee.
U.S. Defense Secretary nominee Ashton Carter has vowed to use a full range of capabilities to protect the U.S. against North Korea. This includes deploying more ground-based missile interceptors in California and Alaska, regions that could be reached by North Korea's ballistic missiles. Carter's remarks came in his written answer to the Senate Armed Services Committee for his confirmation hearing on Wednesday. He added that North Korea's ballistic missile and weapons of mass destruction are a serious and direct threat to U.S. forces in the Asia-Pacific region and to regional allies and partners. And to further protect against and respond to threats from Pyongyang, Carter said he will build up missile defense capabilities and strengthen relations with South Korea. And besides North Korea, Carter talked about the escalating tensions in Ukraine, saying he is inclined to send lethal weapons to Kiev to help Ukrainian troops fight pro-Russian rebels.
I think we need to support the Ukrainians in defending themselves.
He also emphasized the importance of pressuring Russia through other means.
The economic and political pressure on Russia has to remain the main center of gravity of our effort at pushing back. And the Europeans are critical to that. So European solidarity and NATO solidarity are critical in this regard.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
In the meantime, South Korea's chief nuclear envoy says Seoul and Beijing are close to reaching a consensus on North Korea's nuclear program. Wrapping up his two-day trip to Beijing Thursday, Hwang Jun-guk told reporters that he had productive discussions with his Chinese counterpart Wu Da-wei on ways to restart the stalled six-party nuclear disarmament talks. Without going into detail, Hwang explained that the two sides agreed to work together to prevent North Korea from engaging in, quote, bad behavior, including provocations such as a nuclear test. Now, for those who are not familiar with the six-party talks, it's a multilateral dialogue which aims to disarm Pyongyang of its nuclear weapons. It involves the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, but has been stalled for over 6 years.
And contrary to North Korea's recent statement that it will no longer talk with the U.S., Washington says the door to dialogue is still open. A senior U.S. official also says the regime can change not through a drastic revolution, but through peaceful means. For this report, we have our Hwang Sung-hee.
North Korea's transformation does not necessarily have to come through a regime change. That's according to U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell at a press conference in Washington on Wednesday. Referring to the transformation in Myanmar's economy, Russell said the opportunities that have opened and the scope of international cooperation has not come at the cost of a revolution. President Obama's remark in a YouTube interview last month fueled speculation that Washington is seeking a regime change in Pyongyang.
And it is very hard to sustain that kind of brutal authoritarian regime in this modern world. Over time, you will see a regime like this collapse.
Russell said he does not take seriously North Korea's latest declaration that it will no longer talk with the U.S. The North has often opted in and out of dialogue, making it difficult to take any single pronouncement as the last word. Russell reiterated that Washington is willing to hold talks with Pyongyang, but only when the regime is ready to demonstrate its sincerity towards denuclearization. At a separate conference in Washington, Chief U.S. Nuclear Envoy Sung Kim said that the U.S. is looking for an opportunity for serious talks with North Korea, but is also working towards stronger sanctions with the international community. The comments come amid reports that the two longtime foes attempted to arrange a secret meeting last week. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
North Korea has slammed the recent remark made by Marzuki Darusman, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in North Korea. On Pyongyang's state-run Korean Central News Agency Wednesday, North Korea's foreign ministry spokesman said Darusman's words were a grave insult to its supreme leadership. In an interview with the Associated Press earlier in the week, Darusman said some 100,000 political prisoners in North Korea could be released immediately if the Kim Jong-un regime was replaced with new leadership. The spokesman also said Washington was writing scripts for North Korean defectors to generate false accusations against Pyongyang on the international stage, adding that the regime will verify all testimony given by the defectors.
Business partners face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Na Hyung-kyung and Daniel Che.
Arirang News. Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
The outrage against the Islamic State militant group is spreading. Jordan has warned of a, quote, earth-shaking retaliation against the extremist group after its horrific killing of a Jordanian pilot this week. Now the focus is on what will happen next. For more, here's our Kim Min-ji.
The brutal execution of a Jordanian pilot has united the Middle East in anger and condemnation. Some Muslim clerics, even those with close ties to jihadists, called the murder despicable. Other prominent religious figures demanded that the extremists be put to death, crucified, or have their arms and legs cut off. All this comes after the release of a video showing pilot Muath al-Qasasbeh being burned alive inside a cage. Middle Eastern nations, including Syria and Israel, were also quick to condemn the horrific killing. Iran's foreign ministry denounced the execution as inhumane and un-Islamic, while the Arab League Secretary General said the killing was beyond belief.
What we have witnessed about the brutal, savage way of killing Lieutenant Muath al-Qasasbeh is beyond belief. It is a barbaric act which should be condemned by everyone in the world.
Jordan has vowed an escalated fight against Islamic State, with King Abdullah pledging to wage a relentless war against the group to protect their faith, values, and human principles. After the video's release, Jordan swiftly hanged 2 Iraqi jihadists on death row, including Sajida al-Rishawi, the woman the militant group had demanded in a prisoner swap. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
A day has passed since a TransAsia Airways plane crash-landed into a river in Taipei. Recovery efforts are underway. At least 31 are confirmed dead, but the death toll is expected to climb as a dozen people are still unaccounted for. Connie Kim has the latest.
Those are the final words from the pilot in the cockpit before a TransAsia Airways plane crashed Wednesday morning. Dramatic video footage captured by a car dashboard camera shows the ATR-72 clipping a bridge shortly after takeoff and crashing into the Keelung River. There were 58 people on board. After the Kinmen Islands-bound flight plunged into the river, 15 people were pulled out of the wreckage. Rescue workers are searching the recovered fuselage and the surrounding waters for the remaining 12 passengers. Most of the passengers on board were Chinese, and China is communicating with Taiwanese officials to provide the latest information to the victims' families. The city of Xianmen, just off the coast of the Kinmen Islands, where the plane was headed, is also gearing up to support the passengers' relatives.
As soon as the entry permit is issued, we will fly the family members there. We are hoping to take them over by Thursday morning.
Aviation officials said the flight lost contact just minutes after takeoff from Taipei's Songshan Airport, and they're still searching for clues as to what caused the crash. With both of the aircraft's black box flight data recorders retrieved, officials are hoping for more information as to what happened. The crash was the airline's second fatal accident in 7 months, raising questions about the company's safety protocols. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Let's shift gears to a different story now. The economic slowdown in Europe is taking a toll on Korea's trade with the Eurozone countries. Korea swung from a surplus to a deficit shortly after signing a free trade pact with the EU in 2011. Our Shin Se-min takes a closer look.
A $10.2 billion deficit. That's how much Korea was down from trading with EU nations last year. Korea's exports, the world's single largest economic bloc, reached over $50 billion, while its imports topped $60 billion. The deficit trend began after the Korea-EU Free Trade Pact was signed in 2011. The following year, Korea suffered the first deficit in 15 years in its trade with Europe, with a shortfall of $970 million. And it rose to $7.3 billion in 2013. The reversal in trend is attributed to the fragile European economy. The situation is so desperate that the European Central Bank recently decided to pump $68 billion every month into the economy to prevent it from completely grinding to a halt. On the plus side, lower tariffs meant a surge in European exports to Korea. Sales of German cars, for example, jumped nearly 30% last year alone.
Imports of German cars, European furniture, and medicine soared, and with the recent sanctions against Iran, many Korean importers turned to EU for crude oil.
Although most Korean exporters suffered from a slow economy in Europe, shipbuilders were the hardest hit. Korean shipyards saw their deliveries to Europe tumble 50% from $12 billion in 2011 to $6 billion last year.
While overall demand is suppressed, Chinese and Japanese shipbuilders have offered cheaper prices to snatch orders from their Korean rivals, taking advantage of the Korean currency's appreciation.
He added that the trend of slow exports to the Eurozone is likely to continue, at least in the foreseeable future. Experts say that although the gaping trade shortfall is largely due to chronic economic slump in Europe, Korean companies will have to step up efforts to make their products more attractive to European consumers in terms of price, quality, and branding. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Is Apple developing an autonomous car? A Dodge Caravan spotted 50 kilometers from San Francisco suggests it's a possibility. A local CBS affiliate reports that vehicle is leased to Apple. The website that posted images of the minivan said it looked like Google's self-driving car, but without the Google logo. The placement of the roof cameras is different from the ones used for mapping shops and streets as they face toward the vehicle. Apple didn't comment on the vehicle in question or on whether it's developing driverless cars. But the rumor has the markets thrilled. On the Nasdaq, Apple shares rose to a record high of $120.50 at one point during midday trading on Wednesday, and it closed nearly 0.8% up from Tuesday. Well, there's nothing that can match a mother's love. It has no limits when it comes to the well-being of her kids. Our Im Yun-hee introduces us to a landmark play starring veteran actress Son Suk called Mother.
A mother's love. There's nothing quite like it. Whether you're right or wrong, good or bad, she's always there to scold you, but also to pick you up when you fall. For the past 15 years, the story of this mother has been told on stage. Her heartbreaks and her trials, all her pains and her joys felt through her cries. Played by veteran actress Son Suk, Mother flashes back to the tragedies experienced by this lone mother in this landmark, heartfelt performance.
Even though I performed this for 15 years, every time it's for a new audience, so for me it's also a new performance. I think about my mother's life and the mothers of our generation and what they had to go through. Sometimes a man would have to leave his family, and although it's not the exact same situation, I think those burdens and pains are similar.
The past can haunt the present. But for this stage, the past and present sit in such close quarters, it's hard to distinguish where one ends and where one begins. This stage serves as a portal, flashing back and forth through time, taking the characters with it. This mother revisits her struggles, a time when she had to endure waves of hardships and toils. Her present form tries to comfort her past self, a time when she was uneducated, alone, and confused. Those agonies felt just as sharply as when they were first incurred.
The door is open between the past and the present, inviting in memories, whether they're welcome or not.
Time is dismantled, the setting is dismantled, and the people are displaced, making this a postmodern performance. The window was made to be like a reflective surface. One side is the present, your current life, while the other side is the afterlife, filled with history, which comes in the form of memories and sometimes traumatic events. This window is meant to be a source of reflection.
The ending of a story doesn't always have to be a happy one. Sometimes closure is enough. There are no limits on her love, both in space and in time. She's a protector, a provider, a lover. Her name is Mother. Im Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
Well, it sends chills up my spine and goosebumps all over my skin because, you know, a lioness is at its fiercest when it's protecting its cubs, and I can relate to that when my mom had to step up her game when my dad wasn't doing too well in the financial front. Oh, moving on to other stories, we're going to talk about stress relief. Is there a special personal way of stress relief for you?
I tend to go watch a movie or just pick up a book and try to forget all the stress that I'm dealing with.
Sometimes they can give you more stress, right? Depending on the movie you chose or the activities. But apparently, one new method is coloring books, I heard.
That's right, and these are not your regular coloring books for kids. Our Kwon So-ah has this next story.
Who says coloring is just for kids? These days, grown-ups are picking up their own coloring pencils as a trend that started in Europe has arrived in Korea. Now here's a bestseller that doesn't require any reading, just coloring. Secret Garden was published in August last year in Korea after its original release in 2013 in the UK. While the fun factor remains the same as it did years ago, there's a little more substance behind coloring books for grown-ups. It's mostly quoted as having an anti-stress effect, as coloring is commonly used for therapy.
Coloring books tend to make me more patient and calm. That's why I buy a number of them each year.
Publishing companies were quick to respond to the popularity, realizing the positive psychological effects.
Coloring books is like getting away from the busy life, so although it takes some time, I think this is the best method to relieve stress.
Around 100 different coloring books have appeared on shelves in Korea in a span of just 5 months. Most of them from abroad. But not this one. Minhwa Coloring Wish Book. It's made by folk art artist Ho Gong-im. Minhwa is a Korean art genre known as the art of the common people from the 17th to 19th century.
I made the book since Korean traditional elements cannot be found in Western coloring books. I aim to sell my copyrights abroad too.
Saw also stresses that her book is unlike other coloring books that have been made through computer graphics, as she drew her illustrations herself with a brush. Despite the high demand, there are limits to the healing effects. As experts say, coloring by yourself just satisfies a temporary sense of accomplishment. A book may not replace your therapist, but fans of the new trend say it does add an extra splash of color to their everyday lives. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And now it's time for weather. We'll hand things over to Michelle Park at the Weather Center.
Well, I hear she has some suggestions for foods that could help eliminate the toxins from our lungs. And there's a reason why she's telling us that, right, Michelle?
Right. Good evening, guys. As you can see, I have listed some of the things that can help fortify your lungs, and these will prevent lung disease, suppresses lung damage, and wash away some of the toxins that are deposited into your lungs. So during this season, when we are expecting high levels of fine dust like yesterday and today, give these food a try to stay healthy. Now, with that in mind, let's see what the dust levels are like. Now, currently, the levels have gotten worse, especially over in Seoul, Gyeonggi-do, and Chungcheongbuk-do provinces. So be sure to wear a mask if you're in these regions. Now, looking further into the forecast, it will be partly cloudy with temperatures similar to today until Sunday, when we'll see sudden temperature drops in the mornings. Now let's take a look at the readings for tomorrow. So we'll start off the Friday morning at -5 and gets up high to 6 degrees, while Daegu and Busan will top out higher at 8 and 10 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island gets up to 9, Dokdo hits down to 6, while Mangungan dips low to -2 degrees. Well, that's all for now. Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that's it from us at this hour. Have a great rest of the evening. If you're in Korea, this has been Nae Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Che. Hyun-kyung and I will be back at the same time tomorrow, so do join us then. For now, goodbye.